My wife's alpha lover tried to touch her in front of our kids and my mom. I broke his nose. I used to believe my life was a portrait of success. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of my kids laughing in the living room, my mother humming as she prepared breakfast, and the soft footsteps of my wife, Maria, as she moved around the house. It was the kind of life I thought every man dreamed of. A loving family, a cozy home, and the feeling that I'd built something real and lasting. Maria and I had been married for 12 years. I still remember the way she looked on our wedding day. Confident, radiant, and every bit the woman I knew I wanted to spend my life with. Over the years, life got busier, sure. Jobs demanded more of us, kids needed our attention, and the grind of everyday life began to set in. But we managed. At least I thought we did. Maria had always been the life of the party. She was warm, funny, and the kind of person people naturally gravitated toward. I loved that about her. I still remember how she'd make fun of my dad jokes at dinner, rolling her eyes but laughing anyway, while our kids, Nate and Sophie, begged me to stop embarrassing them. It was the little moments like those that made me feel like the luckiest man alive. And my mom, bless her heart, was the glue that held us together. After Dad passed, I insisted she come live with us. Maria was hesitant at first, worried about privacy and space, but eventually, she warmed to the idea. Mom was good with the kids, and her presence brought a kind of balance to our home. She had a way of making things feel safe. I worked a steady job, and while it wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills and allowed Maria the flexibility to stay home and pursue her hobbies. She had a knack for organizing community events and a passion for fitness. I used to tease her that she could run a boot camp with how disciplined she was about her workouts. But if I'm honest, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. Maria joining new fitness classes, staying out a little later than usual, and talking about her new friends at the gym. I chalked it up to her finding something she loved. After all, isn't that what you're supposed to do as a partner? Support their interests? The kids adored her. Sophie, my youngest, called Maria her hero and spent hours trying to emulate her every move. Nate, on the other hand, was growing into his teenage years, but he still made time to seek Maria's advice on everything from school projects to what sneakers to buy. Watching them interact was one of my greatest joys. Still, there were moments, small ones, that I couldn't ignore. The way Maria's laughter didn't quite reach her eyes when I told a joke. The way she'd brush off my questions about her day with vague answers like, "Oh, just the usual." I'd find myself staring at her across the dinner table, trying to read her expression, trying to understand what was happening beneath the surface. If there was one thing I prided myself on, it was being present for my family. I wasn't the guy who worked late nights or spent weekends glued to a screen. I was there for soccer games, school plays, and lazy Sunday afternoons spent binge-watching cartoons with the kids. But lately, I started to feel like I was showing up for a performance that Maria wasn't interested in anymore. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I reached over to hold her hand. It was something we used to do all the time, back when we were just two young people figuring out life together. But that night, she pulled her hand away, pretending she needed to check her phone. I remember laughing it off, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, it felt like everything. Looking back, I wonder if I should have said something then, asked her what was really going on. Maybe I was too scared of the answer. Or maybe I was too focused on keeping the peace, convincing myself that every marriage goes through rough patches. At the time, I had no idea my world was about to be turned upside down. If I could pinpoint the exact moment everything unraveled, it wasn't a big, dramatic revelation. No, it was something small, something annoyingly mundane. I was looking for a charger. It was one of those days when everything seems to go wrong. Nate had left his math homework at school, Sophie spilled juice on the couch, and I was running late for a work meeting. My phone was dying, and I knew Maria kept a charger in her gym bag. She was out running errands, so I figured I'd just grab it and plug my phone in. But when I unzipped that bag, I didn't find the charger. I found a card. a small, expensive-looking card tucked into one of the side pockets. Curious, I pulled it out. To the most stunning woman I've ever known. Can't wait to see you tonight. A. For a second, I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe Maria had picked it up for a friend or was planning some elaborate prank. I even laughed out loud, thinking how ridiculous it was to feel the tiny pit of dread forming in my stomach. But then I noticed the handwriting. Sharp and slanted, definitely not hers. Definitely not mine. I froze. My mind raced through every possibility, but the simplest one stood out like a flashing neon sign. This wasn't innocent. My heart started pounding, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at that card as if it would explain itself. It didn't. When Maria came home later that day, I tried to act normal. I sat through dinner, made small talk, laughed at Sophie's silly knock-knock jokes, but my mind was somewhere else. I told myself I needed proof, real proof, before jumping to conclusions. That night, while Maria was in the shower, I picked up her phone. I wasn't proud of it, but something inside me needed answers. I had never been the type to snoop, but desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Her phone was locked. Of course it was. But I'd seen her unlock it 100 times before, and after a few tries, the screen lit up. And there it was. Text messages, dozens of them, from a contact saved as Trainer Alex. I scrolled through, my hands shaking as I read the exchanges. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. When can I see you again? I'm counting down the hours, gorgeous. My stomach turned. There were pictures too. Nothing explicit, but enough to confirm what my gut already knew. Alex wasn't her trainer. He was her lover. I put the phone down and sat there in the dark, trying to process what I'd just seen. My chest felt tight, like someone had tied a rope around my ribs and was pulling it tighter and tighter. I wanted to confront her right then, burst into the bathroom and demand an explanation. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there thinking about our life, our kids, my mom, everything we'd built together. Was it all a lie? Had I been so blind that I didn't see this coming? Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noticed the way she always seemed to have her phone in her hand, the way she'd smile at her screen and quickly swipe away whenever I came near. I noticed the gym bag always packed, the excuses piling up about late-night errands and extra yoga classes. I started piecing it all together. The girls' night out she came home from at 2 a.m. last month. The perfume I smelled on her one evening, citrusy and sharp, definitely not her usual vanilla scent. The way she'd suddenly started dressing up for her workouts. And then there was the way she looked at me. Or, more accurately, the way she didn't. I knew I couldn't sit on this forever. I needed to confront her, to hear her say the words out loud. But a part of me was terrified. What if she admitted it? What if she didn't even try to deny it? What if this wasn't something I could fix? So, one evening, I asked her casually about Alex. Her face gave her away before her words ever could. That slight widening of her eyes, the brief flicker of panic before she masked it with indifference. "Oh, Alex? He's just my trainer," she said, her voice light, almost dismissive. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Maria," I said quietly, "don't lie to me." And just like that, the facade crumbled. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable, and said, "I didn't think you'd find out." The room felt like it had been sucked of air. My ears buzzed, my heart pounded, and all I could think was, what do I do now? I'll admit, I wasn't prepared for Alex. Or Alpha, as I'd later hear Maria call him in one of her texts. That nickname was my first clue about the kind of man I was dealing with. Someone who thought he was better than everyone else. Someone who thought the world owed him admiration just for existing. The first time I saw him in person, it was by accident. I had gone to pick up some groceries, trying to knock out my weekend errands before the kids got restless at home. Maria had mentioned she was at the gym, so when I spotted her car parked outside a trendy little cafe on the way back, I didn't think much of it. She loved her post-workout smoothies. I decided to stop by and surprise her, maybe sit down for a quick coffee together. It had been a while since we'd had an uninterrupted moment, and I thought it might be nice to connect. But as I approached the window, I saw her. And him. He was hard to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dripping with the kind of over-the-top confidence that practically screamed, "Look at me." He wore a tight black shirt that looked like it was painted on, highlighting every inch of his gym-sculpted frame. His arms were crossed, leaning casually on the table, as if the whole world revolved around his conversation with Maria. She was smiling, laughing even. Not the polite, forced kind of laugh I'd gotten used to at home, but a real, genuine one. It was a laugh I hadn't seen from her in months. Something inside me twisted. I told myself maybe it was innocent. Maybe this was just a trainer-client relationship. But the way he leaned in, the way his hand briefly brushed hers as she reached for her drink, it was too familiar, too intimate. I stood frozen outside that window, unsure of what to do. Should I walk in and introduce myself? Should I act like I didn't see anything? Instead, I turned and walked back to my car, my stomach churning with emotions I couldn't yet name. Over the next few weeks, Alex became more than just a name on Maria's phone or a shadow in my thoughts. He became a presence. Maria talked about him often, though not by name. She'd casually mention my trainer in conversation, dropping little anecdotes about how funny he was or how he pushed her to be her best self. At first, I tried to play along, asking questions like, "What's he like?" or "What kind of workouts does he make you do?" But her answers were always vague, evasive. Then there were the little changes in her routine. She started spending more time at the gym, sometimes disappearing for hours without explanation. Her wardrobe shifted, tighter leggings, new sports bras, and outfits that seemed designed to draw attention. I told myself it was just her taking better care of herself, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. One day, I decided to see this alpha for myself. I stopped by the gym during one of Maria's sessions, pretending I'd forgotten something at her car. That's when I saw him in his element, holding court like a king among his subjects. He was surrounded by a group of women, all hanging on his every word as he demonstrated an exercise. His voice was loud, booming with authority, and his smile was the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was calculated, practiced, the kind of smile that says, "I know I'm better than you." When he saw Maria, his expression shifted. It wasn't subtle. His grin widened and his tone softened just enough to feel personal. He walked over to her, placing a hand on her lower back as he leaned in to say something. She laughed, her face lighting up in a way that made my chest tighten. I clenched my fists, standing there like an outsider watching my own life unravel. I wanted to march over and demand answers, to tell this guy to back off, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed more than just my suspicions. After that day, Alex wasn't just a name or a face. He was a threat. A walking, talking symbol of everything I was beginning to lose. He wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous in his charm, the way he seemed to slip so easily into Maria's life, and now, into mine. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel inadequate standing next to him. He was everything I wasn't. Loud, flashy, and exuding a kind of confidence I couldn't fake even if I tried. But there was one thing I had that he didn't. 12 years of history with Maria. A family. A life we'd built together. And I wasn't going to let him take that from me without a fight. When you marry someone, you expect honesty, even in the hard moments. You expect, at the very least, the decency of an explanation. But Maria, she gave me nothing but walls, sharp edges, and deflection. After confronting her about Alex the first time, I thought, Naively, I admit that maybe we'd talk, maybe we'd argue, and maybe we'd start to fix things. But instead, she doubled down. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she twisted the knife deeper, cutting me with words that still sting when I think about them. "I didn't think you'd notice," she said, her voice calm, detached, as if she were talking about forgetting to take out the trash. "But honestly, Michael, are you surprised?" Surprised? Was I supposed to expect my wife to find someone else while I was tucking our kids into bed? Was I supposed to see this coming while I was making sure the mortgage got paid and the family stayed afloat? At first, I thought it was a defense mechanism, a way to deflect from her guilt. But no, Maria wasn't guilty. She was entitled. "You don't understand," she said one night when I tried to get her to talk. "I've given everything to this family, everything. And what do I get in return? Predictable dinners? A husband who doesn't even notice when I'm in the room?" Her words hit me like a slap. I didn't notice her? I wanted to scream that I noticed everything. The way she avoided me, the way she smiled at her phone more than she ever smiled at me anymore, the way her gym bag became her constant companion. I noticed her slipping away. I just didn't know how to stop it. She started staying out later. At first it was workouts and errands. Then it was meeting friends. But there was no mistaking the truth anymore. Alex wasn't just a part of her life. He was her life now. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it anymore. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. I glanced over her shoulder, and for just a second, I saw his name on the screen. Alex. She didn't flinch. She didn't even bother locking her phone like she used to. It was as if she wanted me to see. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. "Texting Alex," she said without looking up. "We're planning the next session." The next session. She said it so casually, as if I didn't know what that really meant. I tried to talk to her that night, to plead with her to see what this was doing to our family. But she just rolled her eyes and brushed me off. "Michael, you're being dramatic," she said. "This doesn't change anything. I'm still here, aren't I? I'm still taking care of the kids." Taking care of the kids? Was that supposed to excuse the late nights, the lies, the complete disregard for our marriage? "You're not here," I said, my voice breaking. "Not really." Her response? A shrug. A damn shrug. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. "I'm happy for the first time in years. You should be happy for me too." Happy for her? Happy that she found fulfillment in the arms of another man while I was here, picking up the pieces of the life we'd built together? It wasn't just her words that cut deep. It was her actions. She started dressing differently, wearing outfits that I knew weren't for me. She spent money on spa days and new clothes, things she never used to prioritize. One weekend, while I was home with the kids and my mom, Maria decided to go on a retreat. She called it a wellness weekend. I knew better. The way she packed her bag, the way she smiled just a little too much when she said Alex's name in passing. It was clear where she was going and who she'd be with. When she came back, she didn't even bother pretending she missed us. Instead, she looked refreshed, almost glowing. And when I asked her how it was, she smirked and said, "Exactly what I needed." I was furious. Not just because of what she was doing, but because of how little she seemed to care about how it affected anyone else. "Do you even think about us?" I asked her that night. "About what this is doing to the kids? To me?" She sighed, as if my question was a chore. "Michael, you'll be fine," she said. "You always are. You don't need me like I need him." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just losing Maria. I'd already lost her. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the woman I married. She was someone else entirely. And the worst part? She didn't care. It's one thing to feel the weight of betrayal yourself, but it's an entirely different pain when it starts to seep into the lives of the people you love the most. My kids didn't know what was happening. At least, not at first. But kids are more observant than we give them credit for. And no matter how much I tried to shield them, the cracks in our family became impossible to hide. Sophie, my youngest, was the first to sense something was wrong. She's only 8, but she has this uncanny ability to pick up on emotions, like a radar for tension. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, she tugged at my sleeve and asked, "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy eat with us anymore?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't even realized Maria had been skipping family meals more frequently, coming home late or retreating to the bedroom as soon as she walked through the door. I told Sophie that Mommy was busy, that she had a lot on her plate, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't buy it. Nate, my 11-year-old, responded differently. Where Sophie was sensitive and inquisitive, Nate became quiet, withdrawn. He started spending more time in his room, avoiding family movie nights or skipping his usual after-dinner chess games with me. One evening, I found him sitting on his bed, staring at a blank page in his homework notebook. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting beside him. "What's going on?" He shrugged but didn't look at me. After a long pause, he finally muttered, "Is Mommy mad at us?" That question hit me like a punch to the gut. Mad at us? No, she wasn't mad. She was just gone. Checked out. Focused on someone who wasn't part of this family anymore. But how do you explain that to a child? "No, Nate," I said softly. "Mommy's just busy. It has nothing to do with you or Sophie." He nodded, but the look on his face told me he wasn't convinced. Then there was my mother. She tried to keep things normal, to hold the family together in the ways that mothers do, but I could see how much this was weighing on her. She's always been a strong woman, someone who doesn't let emotions get the better of her. But even she couldn't hide the worry etched into her face. One night, after the kids were asleep, I found her sitting at the kitchen table nursing a cup of tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the mug, and her eyes were distant, as if she were staring through the walls. "Mom?" I said, sitting down across from her. She looked up, her expression softening. "Michael, I know you don't want to talk about it, but something's wrong with Maria." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. How could I admit to my own mother that my wife, my partner of over a decade, was having an affair? "Mom," I finally said, "I'm trying to fix it." She reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. "The kids can feel it, Michael. They know something's not right." That conversation stayed with me. I started noticing more of the subtle ways the kids were being affected. Sophie stopped asking Maria for bedtime stories, turning to me instead. Nate stopped talking about his school projects with her. They weren't angry. They were hurt. They were slowly learning how to live without their mom being present, even when she was physically in the house. And Maria? She barely noticed. Her time at home became shorter and shorter. When she was there, she was glued to her phone or locked in the bedroom. Once, I walked past the kids' room and heard Sophie whisper to Nate, "Do you think Mommy still loves us?" That broke me. I wanted to march into our room, shove that phone out of her hands, and demand she explain to our children why she was acting like a stranger. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I tried harder to fill the gaps she was leaving behind. I made their lunches, attended their school events, played board games in the evenings, all the things Maria used to do. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't be both parents. The weight of it all was crushing. My kids were losing their mother in slow, agonizing increments, and my mother was watching her son fight a losing battle to hold the family together. I knew something had to change, but every time I looked at Maria, I saw a wall I couldn't climb. And the harder I tried to reach her, the more she seemed to drift away. There's something uniquely humiliating about a man invading your home. Not physically at first, but through the cracks of your life, making himself known in ways that feel almost taunting. That's what Alex did. Slowly, deliberately, he began inserting himself into our family's narrative as if he had a right to be there. It started with little things. Maria would drop his name into conversations as though he were just another acquaintance. Alex recommended this great protein shake, she'd say while mixing some overpriced powder into her blender. Or, Alex thinks stretching after workouts is overrated, as she'd casually do yoga in the living room. His name floated through our house like an unwelcome guest I couldn't throw out. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. People have friends, people talk about their trainers. But the tone of her voice when she said his name, it was different. Lighter. There was an excitement there I hadn't heard in months, maybe even years. And it wasn't for me. The first time he crossed the threshold of my home, I wasn't even there. I found out later from Nate, of all people. He mentioned it over dinner in that casual way kids do when they have no idea they're dropping bombs. "Mommy's friend came over today," he said, poking at his mashed potatoes. "Friend?" I asked, my fork pausing midair. "Who?" Nate shrugged. "Some guy. He had big muscles." My stomach twisted. I tried to act nonchalant, not wanting to alarm the kids or tip Maria off to the storm brewing inside me. "What was he doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "He and Mommy were talking in the living room. She told us to play outside." Nate glanced at me, his fork now idle. "Was that okay?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Of course, buddy. Mommy can have friends." But inside, my thoughts were anything but calm. Why was Alex, that guy, in my house, the place I'd built for my family, the place where my kids played, where my mother lived, where I'd poured years of effort into creating a home? After that, his presence became bolder. Maria stopped hiding her connection to him. She'd take calls from him in the middle of dinner, her voice dropping to a softer, more private tone as she walked out of the room. Once, while we were watching a movie with the kids, her phone lit up with a text. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. Alex appeared in bold letters across the screen, followed by a message. "Can't stop thinking about you." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. The audacity of it. To have him intrude on a family night, his words stealing her attention while I sat right there. Then came the day I came home early from work. The kids were at school, and my mom was out running errands. I stepped through the door, expecting an empty house, but instead, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. Maria's laughter, bright and carefree in a way I hadn't heard in months. And it wasn't alone. I walked in to find Alex standing by the counter, leaning casually against it as if he owned the place. Maria was facing him, a cup of coffee in her hands, her face glowing with that same light I used to see when we first started dating. They both froze when they saw me. "Michael," Maria said, her voice unnaturally chipper. "You're home early." I didn't respond right away. My eyes were fixed on Alex, who gave me the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He extended a hand, as though we were old friends meeting for the first time. "You must be Michael," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Maria's told me a lot about you." I didn't take his hand. Instead, I crossed my arms and stared at him, letting the tension fill the room. "I'm sure she has." Maria laughed nervously, stepping between us as if that would somehow diffuse the situation. "Alex was just leaving," she said quickly, setting her coffee down. "He stopped by to drop off, something from the gym." "Right," Alex said, straightening up. The supplements." I didn't say a word as he walked past me, his cologne lingering in the air like a challenge. The front door closed, and for a moment, the house was silent. Then I turned to Maria. "Supplements?" I asked, my voice cold. Her eyes darted to the coffee cup as if it held the answers. "He's just a friend, Michael. Don't make this into something it's not." But it already was something. It was him, standing in my kitchen, laughing with my wife while I was out working to keep this family afloat. It was him knowing my kids, walking through my door and pretending he belonged here. It was the way Maria's eyes lit up around him, the way her voice softened when she said his name. It was everything I wasn't, and everything I couldn't ignore any longer. It wasn't one moment that brought me to my breaking point. It was a slow, excruciating buildup, a series of humiliations, betrayals, and tiny slights that chipped away at my resolve until there was nothing left to hold me back. But when it came, it was like a dam bursting, and every ounce of rage and frustration I'd bottled up exploded all at once. It started on a Saturday afternoon, one of those rare weekends when the kids weren't drowning in homework or glued to their screens. I'd planned a family game day, a simple, wholesome way to bring us together. Sophie was setting up her favorite board game, and Nate was grumbling about how he always lost, but even he couldn't hide his excitement. My mom was in the kitchen baking cookies, her way of making the day feel extra special. For a moment, it felt like the family I'd been fighting so hard to protect was still intact. And then Maria's phone buzzed. She was sitting on the couch, half engaged in the kids' chatter, scrolling absent-mindedly as she so often did these days. When the notification came through, her entire demeanor changed. Her lips curved into a smile, not the kind she gave me or the kids, but the kind she used to save for special moments, moments that mattered. Without a word, she stood up, grabbing her phone and heading toward the kitchen. I followed her, my stomach already knotting, even though I told myself it could be innocent. It never was. "Who's that?" I asked casually, trying to keep my tone light. "Just Alex," she replied, not even looking up as she typed furiously into her phone. That name. It had become like nails on a chalkboard to me. "What does he want now?" I pressed. Maria sighed, finally glancing up. "Nothing. He's just asking about my schedule for next week." I should have let it go. That's what I'd been doing for months, letting things go, swallowing my pride, pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. But this time, I couldn't. "Can you put the phone down for one day?" I snapped. "We're supposed to be spending time as a family." Her expression hardened. "Why are you making this a big deal? It's just a text." "It's never just a text, Maria," I said, my voice rising. "Every time you pick up that phone, it's him. Every time you smile like that, it's for him." "What about us? What about our kids? Do they even matter to you anymore?" Her eyes flashed with anger, and for the first time, she didn't try to deny it. "Maybe if you acted like you mattered to me, I wouldn't need him." The words hit me like a slap. Sophie and Nate were just in the other room, and my mom was close enough to hear everything. Maria didn't care. She stood there, defiant, daring me to respond. Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang. I froze. Maria didn't. She walked past me without hesitation, her heels clicking against the floor with purpose. When she opened the door, there he was. Alex, standing on my porch like he had every right to be there. "Hey," he said casually, giving Maria that smug smile I'd come to hate. "I thought I'd stop by and—" He stopped when he saw me. His smile faltered for a split second before he recovered, his confidence sliding back into place like armor. "What is he doing here?" I demanded, my voice low but filled with barely contained fury. Maria turned to me, her expression cold. "He's here to pick me up. Pick her up, from my house, in front of my kids." Sophie peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with confusion. Nate was right behind her, his face a mixture of fear and anger. My mom had stepped into the hallway, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice trembling with rage. Alex stepped forward, his smug smile widening. "Hey man, calm down. We're just going out for a bit. Nothing to get worked up about." And then, he did it. He reached out and placed his hand on Maria's lower back, a gesture so casual, so possessive, that it made something inside me snap. Before I knew what I was doing, my fist connected with his face. The sound of the impact echoed through the house, followed by Alex stumbling backward, clutching his nose as blood began to pour. Maria screamed. The kids cried out. My mom gasped, but I didn't care. All I could see was Alex, his arrogant smile replaced by shock and pain as he stared up at me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Maria shouted, rushing to Alex's side. But I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest was heaving, my fists still clenched, and all I could think was, finally. Finally, he wasn't smiling. Finally, he felt even a fraction of the humiliation I'd been carrying for months. And then Sophie's voice broke through the chaos, trembling and small. "Daddy, why did you hit him?" I looked at her, at Nate, at my mom, and for the first time I realized just how much this moment had cost me. You always imagine the breaking point as some epic slow-motion moment, something dramatic, cinematic, with time to prepare. But the truth is, when it happens, it's raw, chaotic, and messy. That day wasn't planned. I didn't wake up thinking, today's the day I lose it. But looking back, I guess it had been building for months. It started like any other Saturday. The kids were excited about a family movie night, and my mom had made her signature jollof rice for dinner. For a few hours, it felt like we were normal again, like the shadow of Maria's betrayal wasn't hovering over us. Maria, of course, was glued to her phone most of the day, but I'd gotten used to it. It was almost easier to ignore her distractions than to confront the reality of what was happening. She laughed a few times during dinner, mostly at Sophie's jokes, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things weren't completely lost. And then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was a delivery or one of the neighborhood kids selling something. But when I opened the door, there he was. Alex, standing on my porch, wearing that smug grin I'd come to loathe. "Hey, Michael," he said casually, as though we were old friends. Maria invited me over. It took everything in me not to slam the door in his face right then and there. "She what?" I asked, my voice low and even, though my fists were already clenching at my sides. Before I could say anything else, Maria appeared behind me, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She placed a hand on my shoulder, an almost mocking gesture of control, and stepped past me. "I told you he'd overreact," she said to Alex with a laugh, as if I wasn't standing right there. My chest tightened. Overreact? She thought this was a joke? "What is he doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and disbelief. Maria didn't even look at me. "We're going out," she said simply, grabbing her purse from the hall table. "Out?" I repeated, staring at her like I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. Alex stepped forward, his grin widening. "Relax, man, it's just dinner." Dinner. In front of my kids. In my house. "Michael, don't make a scene," Maria said, brushing past me to open the door wider for Alex. That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stepped in front of her, blocking the doorway. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Maria scoffed, crossing her arms. "Michael, move. You're embarrassing yourself." But I didn't move. That's when Alex made his mistake. Instead of staying out of it, he reached out and placed his hand on Maria's lower back. It was a small gesture, maybe even innocent in his mind, but to me, it was the ultimate insult. He didn't just touch her. He claimed her. And I wasn't going to stand there and let him do it. Before I even realized what I was doing, my fist collided with his face. The sound of the impact was sharp and brutal, and Alex stumbled backward, clutching his nose as blood began to pour down his hand. "What the hell?" he shouted, his voice muffled through the blood. Maria screamed, shoving me back with surprising force. "What is wrong with you?" she yelled, kneeling beside Alex as if I were the villain in this story. The kids ran into the hallway, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Sophie started crying, and Nate just stood there, frozen, his fists clenched like he wanted to hit someone too but didn't know who. "Daddy, stop!" Sophie sobbed, her tiny voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. I looked at her, my heart breaking into pieces. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want my daughter to see her father like this, angry, violent, out of control. But I also couldn't stand there and let this man, this intruder, continue to disrespect me, my family, and everything I'd worked so hard to build. Alex tried to stand, but I stepped forward, glaring down at him. "Get out," I said, my voice low and cold. "Get out of my house." "Michael, stop," Maria shouted, standing between us. "You're acting insane." "Insane?" I barked, pointing at Alex. "You brought him here, to our house, in front of our kids, and I'm the one acting insane?" Alex stumbled toward the door, still clutching his nose. "This guy's a psycho," he muttered, glaring at me as he left. "Don't come back," I called after him. Maria stared at me, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. "You're unbelievable," she hissed. I turned to the kids. Sophie was crying into my mom's arms, while Nate stood stiffly, his face pale. My mom looked at me, her expression heavy with disappointment, though I could tell she wasn't upset with me. She was upset with Maria. For a moment, the house was silent except for Sophie's soft sobs. I stood there, my fists still clenched, my chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just the day of the fight. It was the day my family broke. I always imagined Alex as this larger-than-life figure. He was the alpha, wasn't he? The gym-going, smooth-talking man who seemed to thrive on the thrill of taking what wasn't his. He had an air of invincibility about him, or at least Maria acted like he did. But when push came to shove, literally, Alex turned out to be nothing more than a pretender, a man whose confidence crumbled the second real consequences showed up at his doorstep. After I broke his nose, the look on his face was priceless. Gone was the smug, confident grin he always wore like a badge of honor. In its place was raw panic, his eyes wide and watery as blood poured down his face. For a man who loved to project dominance, he looked shockingly small in that moment, clutching his nose and stumbling back like a deer caught in headlights. You're insane," he sputtered, his voice muffled and nasally. He pointed a shaky finger at me as though trying to regain some semblance of control, but his tone gave him away. He was scared. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low and steady, my fists still clenched. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The weight of my words hung in the air, and for the first time, Alex didn't try to talk back. Maria, of course, rushed to his side, grabbing a dish towel from the counter to press against his face. "Michael, what the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, her voice shrill and panicked. But even as she yelled at me, I noticed the way she glanced at Alex, her expression flickering with something I hadn't seen before. Doubt. "Are you okay?" she asked him, her voice softening. "I think he broke my nose." Alex whined, wincing dramatically as he leaned against the wall. "This guy's a lunatic." I took a step toward him, and he flinched, raising his hands defensively like I was about to hit him again. That was when I realized it. Alex wasn't the strong, fearless man he pretended to be. He was a coward. A man who thrived on other people's weaknesses but fell apart the second someone stood up to him. "What's the matter, Alex?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not so alpha now, are you?" He glared at me, but there was no fire behind it, just a desperate attempt to save face. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice shaky. I'll press charges." "Go ahead," I said, crossing my arms. "Call the cops. Let's see how well that works out for you when they find out you've been screwing another man's wife in his own house." Maria gasped, looking at me like I'd just said the unforgivable. "Michael," she hissed. "The kids." The kids? I interrupted, my voice rising. You mean the kids you dragged into this mess by bringing him here? Don't you dare pretend this is about them now. Alex tried to inch toward the door, clearly eager to escape the situation. You're not worth it, man, he muttered, wiping his face with the towel Maria had given him. You're pathetic. Pathetic? I repeated, stepping closer. Says the guy bleeding all over my kitchen. You're the one who walked into my house thinking you could take what wasn't yours. And now you're running away like a scared little boy. He didn't respond. He just kept moving toward the door, his confidence long gone. Before he left, he turned to Maria, his eyes pleading. Come on, let's go. We don't need to stay here and deal with this. But Maria didn't move. She stood there staring at him, her expression unreadable. For the first time, I saw something shift in her. She'd always defended him, always made excuses for his presence in her life. But now? Now she looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Maria? Alex said, his voice cracking slightly. She started, but then she stopped, her gaze flickering between me, the kids peeking around the corner, and Alex. He waited for her, his frustration growing. Maria, let's go. But instead of following him, she hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Alex huffed, clearly realizing he was on his own. Fine, he spat, shoving the door open. Good luck dealing with this loser, he added, jerking his thumb toward me before slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, my chest heaving, my fists still clenched, while Maria stared at the door. For the first time, she didn't defend him. She didn't say a word, because deep down, she knew. The man she'd risked everything for wasn't the strong, confident alpha she'd built him up to be. He was just a coward in a tight shirt, and now that the mask was off, there was no going back. If there's one thing Maria has always been good at, it's shifting the blame. It didn't matter what the situation was. Somehow, I was always the one left holding the bag. So, when Alex stormed out of the house clutching his bloody nose, it wasn't surprising that Maria's anger turned squarely on me. But knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier to handle. The moment the door slammed behind Alex, Maria spun around, her face twisted in rage. "What the hell is wrong with you, Michael?" she yelled, her voice echoing through the house. I stood there, still breathing heavily, my fists clenched at my sides. "What's wrong with me?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You brought him here, to our house, in front of our kids, and you're asking what's wrong with me?" Her eyes flared, and she stepped closer, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You embarrassed me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "Humiliating for you?" I barked. "You're worried about how this looks for you? You didn't care about embarrassing me when you paraded your boyfriend into my house?" Her face reddened, and she threw her hands up in frustration. "He's not my boyfriend, Michael. Don't be so dramatic." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, really? So, what is he then? A friend? Your trainer? Is that what you're going to tell the kids when they ask why some strange man was in their home today?" Maria froze for a moment, her eyes flickering toward the hallway where Sophie and Nate had retreated. For a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would take some responsibility. But then she shook her head, her fury reigniting. "This is exactly why I needed someone like Alex," she shouted. "You're impossible to talk to. You twist everything into some big drama. Do you even hear yourself right now?" I stared at her, incredulous. "I twist things? Maria, you've been sneaking around for months. You've lied to me, ignored our kids, and invited that guy into our lives like it's normal. But sure, this is all my fault." She didn't even blink. "You're damn right it is," she snapped. "You haven't cared about me in years, Michael. All you do is work, come home, and pretend everything is fine. Meanwhile, I've been drowning and you didn't even notice." "Drowning?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You were drowning, so your solution was to cheat on me? To blow up our family? Don't stand there and act like you're the victim, Maria. You're not. Her lips trembled, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from anger. You don't get it, she said, her voice shaking. You never have. I've been suffocating in this house, in this marriage, and Alex, he made me feel alive again. There it was, the confession I'd been waiting for. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Alive? You think running off with some arrogant, spineless jerk makes you alive? What about Sophie and Nate? Do they make you feel alive, Maria? Or are they just part of the suffocation you're so desperate to escape? Her face hardened. Don't bring the kids into this, she hissed. They're already in it, I shouted. You put them in it the moment you let him walk through that door. Do you even realize what you've done? Do you even care? Maria opened her mouth to respond, but she was interrupted by a small, trembling voice from the hallway. Mommy? We both turned to see Sophie standing there, her tear-streaked face peeking out from behind the wall. Nate stood behind her, his arms protectively wrapped around her shoulders. Why are you fighting? Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maria's expression softened slightly, but she didn't move toward her. I stepped forward, kneeling down to their level. It's okay, sweetheart, I said gently. Everything's going to be okay. But Sophie shook her head, her tears spilling over. No, it's not, she said. You're mad at Mommy, and she's mad at you, and... She trailed off, looking down at her feet. And I'm scared. Those words cut deeper than anything Maria had said all night. I looked up at her, hoping, praying, that she would see what she was doing to our family. But her face was unreadable, her emotions locked behind a wall I couldn't break through. Go back to your room, sweetie, Maria said finally, her voice soft but firm. Mommy and Daddy need to talk. Sophie hesitated, glancing at me before slowly retreating with Nate. As soon as they were gone, Maria turned back to me, her fury reignited. This is exactly why I didn't tell you about Alex, she said, her voice low and venomous. Because I knew you'd do this. Turn it into a spectacle, drag the kids into it, and make me out to be the bad guy. You are the bad guy, Maria, I said coldly, and the worst part is, you don't even care. Her eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms. If I'm so terrible, then maybe we're better off apart. For the first time that night, I didn't have a response. I just stood there staring at the woman I thought I knew, wondering how we'd gotten to this point, and whether there was anything left to save. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that kids feel everything. They may not always say it out loud, but they absorb the tension, the anger, the heartbreak like sponges. And Sophie and Nate? They were no different. Watching them get caught in the crossfire of Maria's betrayal was the hardest part of all of this. Harder than the lies, harder than Alex, harder than anything else. Sophie, my youngest, wore her emotions on her sleeve. She always has. She's the kind of kid who lights up a room with her laughter but crumbles when she feels like something is wrong. And lately, she'd been crumbling more and more. One night, as I was tucking her into bed, she grabbed my hand, her little fingers clutching mine tightly. Daddy, she whispered, her voice small and hesitant. What is it, sweetheart? I asked, brushing her hair back from her face. Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't say anything. But then she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes and said, Are you and Mommy going to get a divorce? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, unsure of how to respond. Divorce? I hadn't even allowed myself to think that far ahead, but hearing it come from her made it feel all too real. Why would you ask that, Sophie? I said gently, my heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. She shrugged, looking down at her blanket. Because you and Mommy yell at each other all the time now, and she's never here anymore. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. Sophie, listen to me, I said, leaning closer. Your mom and I are working through some things right now, but no matter what happens, we both love you and Nate more than anything. That will never change, okay?" She nodded, but her expression didn't lighten. "I just want things to go back to the way they were," she whispered. "Me too, sweetheart," I said, my voice cracking. "Me too." Nate, on the other hand, handled things differently. Where Sophie was open with her emotions, Nate bottled them up, letting them simmer under the surface. He stopped talking as much, stopped asking for help with his homework, stopped coming to me for advice about his friends or school. It was like he was retreating into himself, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach him. One evening, I found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the yard. I grabbed a couple of sodas from the fridge and sat down beside him, handing him one without saying a word. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of crickets filling the air. Finally, I said, "You've been pretty quiet lately, bud. What's on your mind?" He took a sip of his soda, his gaze still fixed on the yard. "Nothing," he muttered. "Come on, Nate," I said softly. "Talk to me." He sighed, finally looking at me. "Why do you and Mom hate each other now?" I flinched at his words. "We don't hate each other," I said quickly. "We're just going through a rough patch." He raised an eyebrow, a look that was far too skeptical for an 11-year-old. "Yeah, right," he said. "If you don't hate each other, then why does she never want to be here? Why does she only care about that Alex guy?" Hearing his name come out of Nate's mouth made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Nate, listen," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Your mom loves you and Sophie very much. She's just distracted right now. But that doesn't mean she doesn't care about you." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "She doesn't care about any of us," he said bitterly. "She only cares about herself." I reached out to put a hand on his shoulder, but he pulled away, standing up abruptly. "You're just making excuses for her," he said, his voice laced with anger. "She's not coming back, is she?" I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him everything would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't know if it would be. And Nate knew it too. After that, he started spending more time in his room, shutting me out completely. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't open up, no matter how hard I tried. It was like he'd built a wall around himself, and I didn't know how to tear it down. The worst part was seeing how much this was hurting them and feeling completely powerless to fix it. No matter what I said or did, I couldn't undo the damage Maria had caused. And Maria? She didn't seem to notice. She was so wrapped up in her own world, so focused on Alex and her new life, that she barely even looked at the kids anymore. I tried to shield them from the fallout, but there was only so much I could do. The cracks were already there, and no matter how hard I tried to patch them up, they kept growing, spreading, until it felt like our entire family was going to collapse under the weight of it all. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I could hold it together on my own. The court battle wasn't something I wanted, but it was something I knew had to happen. When Maria walked out of our home, taking the kids with her, it felt like my worst nightmare had come true. She claimed she was protecting them, that my anger was a threat to their well-being. It was absurd. She was the one who had brought chaos into their lives, and now she was using my desperation against me. The legal process began like a Cold War. Papers were served, lawyers were hired, and every conversation Maria and I had was filtered through layers of hostility. She wanted full custody, claiming that I was unstable after the fight with Alex. Her lawyer painted me as a man driven by jealousy and rage, unfit to provide a safe environment for our children. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol, saw through Maria's tactics immediately. "This isn't about your anger, Michael," she told me during our first meeting. "This is about control. She wants to punish you, and she's using the kids to do it." Hearing those words lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let Maria use Nate and Sophie as pawns in her power play. They deserved better than that. The first court hearing was surreal. Sitting across from Maria in a sterile courtroom, each of us flanked by our attorneys, felt like something out of a bad movie. She wouldn't look at me, but her posture was rigid, her expression cold and unyielding. I barely recognized her anymore. Her lawyer started with a list of accusations, painting a picture of me as an angry, volatile man who had endangered his family with my violent outburst. They even brought up Alex, his broken nose, his version of the story, his fear for Maria and the kids. Hearing my life reduced to their twisted narrative made my blood boil. But Carol was ready. When it was our turn, she methodically dismantled their arguments, presenting evidence of Maria's neglect and betrayal. She had dug up text messages, financial records, even witness statements from neighbors who had seen Alex's frequent visits to the house. "Your Honor," Carol said during her closing argument, "this is not a case of an unstable father. This is a case of a mother who abandoned her responsibilities, prioritized her affair over her family, and now seeks to alienate her children from the only parent who has consistently been there for them." Maria's face paled as Carol spoke. She wasn't used to being on the defensive, and it showed. The most gut-wrenching part of the trial was when the kids were brought in to speak with a court-appointed evaluator. I wasn't allowed to be present during the interviews, but when the report came back, it was clear where their hearts lay. Nate had told the evaluator that he felt unwanted by his mom and that I was the one who always took care of him. Sophie had cried, saying she missed me and wanted to come home. Those words were like daggers. On one hand, they validated everything I had been fighting for. On the other, they broke my heart. No child should have to feel that way about their own mother. Maria tried to spin it, claiming that I had manipulated the kids against her. But the evaluator wasn't buying it. The report highlighted her absence, her focus on Alex, and the emotional strain she had caused. The final hearing was tense. The judge, a stern but fair woman in her 60s, listened carefully to both sides before delivering her verdict. "While it is clear that both parents love their children," she said, her voice steady, "it is also clear that the father has provided a more stable, nurturing environment. The mother's actions have demonstrated a pattern of neglect and poor judgment, which cannot be overlooked." My heart pounded as she continued. "Therefore, I am awarding primary custody to the father, with visitation rights for the mother." Maria's gasp echoed through the courtroom. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock, as though she hadn't considered the possibility of losing. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk or say anything to rub it in. I just closed my eyes, exhaled, and let the weight of the moment settle over me. Afterward, as I was leaving the courthouse, Maria approached me in the hallway. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, but instead she hissed, "You'll regret this, Michael. You've turned them against me." I looked at her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and pity. "No, Maria," I said quietly. "You did that all on your own." Walking out of that building, I felt a bittersweet sense of victory. I had won the battle for my kids, but the war had left scars that would take a long time to heal. Still, as I drove home with Nate and Sophie in the back seat, their laughter filling the car for the first time in weeks, I knew I'd done the right thing. Because no matter how messy the fight had been, they were worth it. Every second of it. Winning custody of Nate and Sophie should have felt like crossing the finish line of a marathon, exhausted but triumphant. Instead, it felt like stepping into uncharted territory, carrying the weight of two fragile hearts that had been bruised and battered along the way. The courtroom may have ruled in my favor, but victory came with its own complexities, its own set of challenges. The moment the judge awarded me primary custody, I felt a surge of relief mixed with a deep, almost overwhelming responsibility. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving to my kids that they still had a parent they could rely on, someone who wouldn't abandon them for selfish reasons. When we left the courthouse, Nate and Sophie clung to me like lifelines. Sophie, who had been so confused and scared through it all, finally smiled. Her first genuine smile in weeks. She squeezed my hand tightly and whispered, "Does this mean we're going home?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "We're going home." Nate didn't say much, but the way he leaned into my side, his small hand gripping my arm, spoke volumes. My mom, standing nearby, gave me a look that was equal parts pride and encouragement. She'd been my rock through this entire ordeal, and I knew I wouldn't have made it without her. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Peaceful, not tense. Sophie hummed softly in the back seat, while Nate stared out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. I caught his eye in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in a long while, he gave me a small, tentative smile. Once we got home, I made a point to sit down with them. I wanted them to understand that while things were going to be different, they were also going to be okay. "Listen," I began, my voice steady but gentle. "I know the past few months have been really hard, but I promise you from now on, we're going to focus on us. On this family. No more yelling, no more worrying about what's going to happen next. We're safe, and we're together. That's what matters." Sophie crawled into my lap, wrapping her arms around my neck. "I missed you, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I missed you too, sweetheart," I whispered, holding her close. Nate stayed quiet, but as the days went by, I saw him start to come out of his shell. He joined me in the kitchen one evening while I was making dinner, something he hadn't done in months. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice tentative. "Of course," I said, handing him a cutting board and a knife. "Think you can handle chopping the vegetables?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was a simple moment, but it felt monumental, like the first brick in the wall we were rebuilding together. Freedom came in other ways, too. The constant tension, the knot in my stomach that had been my constant companion since Maria's affair began, started to loosen. I could finally walk into my own home without feeling like a stranger. I didn't have to tiptoe around her moods or brace myself for the next argument. Maria's presence, or lack thereof, was another kind of freedom. She still had visitation rights, but her interactions with the kids were sporadic at best. At first, she tried to paint herself as the victim, blaming me for stealing them away from her. But as time went on, even the kids saw through her excuses. "She doesn't really care, does she?" Nate said one evening, his tone more resigned than angry. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I think your mom's struggling right now," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." He shrugged, his eyes downcast. "It doesn't feel like she does." Hearing those words from my son broke something inside me, but it also solidified my resolve. I couldn't change Maria, but I could do everything in my power to make sure my kids never doubted how much I loved them. As the weeks turned into months, our home slowly began to feel like ours again. We found new routines, new traditions, movie nights with popcorn, Sunday morning pancake breakfasts, impromptu soccer games in the backyard. The laughter returned, not all at once, but in small, precious bursts that reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. Freedom wasn't just about Maria being out of the picture. It was about reclaiming our lives, piece by piece, and building something stronger from the wreckage she left behind. One night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with her big, trusting eyes and said, "I'm glad we're home, Daddy." "Me too, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. "Me too." For the first time in a long while, I went to bed with a sense of peace. The fight was over, but the real victory was just beginning. It wasn't about winning in court. It was about winning back my kids' trust, their happiness, and the family we'd almost lost. And that, more than anything, felt like freedom. Starting over wasn't easy. I'd like to say that once the court decision was made, life magically fell into place. But that wasn't the case. Picking up the pieces of a broken family felt a lot like trying to rebuild a house in the middle of a storm. Messy, overwhelming, and filled with moments where I questioned if I was strong enough to do it. But I owed it to my kids. I owed it to myself. The first morning after Maria officially moved out felt eerily quiet. There were no strained greetings, no awkward silences at the breakfast table. It was just me, Nate, Sophie, and my mom. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I'd gotten so used to navigating chaos that the stillness almost felt unnatural. "Are we still having pancakes?" Sophie asked, her big eyes looking up at me expectantly. "Of course," I said with a smile, pulling the ingredients from the pantry. As I whisked the batter, Nate joined me at the counter, something he hadn't done in months. He didn't say much, just stood there watching, but the way he handed me the syrup without being asked told me everything I needed to know. We were finding our rhythm again, slowly but surely. Over the next few weeks, I made it my mission to focus on the little things. I knew I couldn't erase the pain Maria had caused, but I could give Nate and Sophie the stability they so desperately needed. We started having game nights every Friday, complete with snacks and a no-screens rule. At first, Nate acted like it was a chore, rolling his eyes whenever Sophie picked a game he thought was lame. But by the second week, I caught him laughing so hard he nearly fell off his chair. The house itself started to change too. I wanted it to feel like ours again, not a place haunted by Maria's absence. With my mom's help, we rearranged the furniture, painted the kids' rooms in their favorite colors, and hung up new family photos. It wasn't about erasing Maria. It was about creating something new, something that felt like a fresh start. One weekend we tackled the backyard. The grass was overgrown, the flower beds neglected, but Nate and Sophie jumped into the project with surprising enthusiasm. Nate took charge of mowing the lawn, while Sophie insisted on planting a butterfly garden. Watching them work together, laughing and bickering in the way only siblings can, made my chest tighten with a mix of pride and gratitude. "Do you think the butterflies will like it?" Sophie asked as she sprinkled wildflower seeds into the soil. "I think they'll love it," I said, ruffling her hair. It wasn't just the kids who were healing. I was too. For so long, I'd felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to hold a crumbling marriage together. But now I felt like I could breathe again. My mom played a big role in our new beginning. She wasn't just a grandmother. She was a steady presence, someone who reminded me that it was okay to lean on others when things got tough. She started teaching Sophie how to bake, filling the house with the smell of cookies and laughter. And with Nate, she shared stories about my childhood, helping him see that even dads make mistakes and learn from them. One evening, after the kids were in bed, my mom and I sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the stars. "You're doing a good job, Michael," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Some days it doesn't feel like it," I admitted. She smiled, placing a hand on mine. "The fact that you care so much means you're doing better than you think." Her words stayed with me. As the months passed, life began to feel normal again. Not the old normal, the one filled with lies and tension, but a new, better version. The kids were thriving at school, bringing home art projects and science experiments with proud grins on their faces. Nate even started talking about trying out for the soccer team, something he hadn't shown interest in since the whole ordeal began. Sophie, ever the chatterbox, made it her mission to teach me about every bug, flower, and bird in our backyard. "Daddy, did you know monarch butterflies migrate thousands of miles every year?" she said one afternoon, holding up a book she'd checked out from the library. "I didn't," I replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. "But I do now." There were still hard days, of course. Days when the kids missed Maria, even if they didn't say it out loud. Days when I wondered if I was doing enough, if I was making the right choices. But those days were fewer and farther between. One night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, She looked up at me with her big, trusting eyes and said, "I'm glad it's just us now, Daddy. It feels better this way." I kissed her forehead, my heart swelling with a mix of love and determination. "Me too, sweetheart," I said. "Me too." A new beginning isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to move forward, even when it's hard. And as I sat on the couch that night, watching Nate beat my mom at chess while Sophie giggled at their banter, I realized we were doing exactly that. We were moving forward. Together. I used to think of Maria as someone who always had control, a woman who could walk into a room and command attention, who always seemed to have a plan. But after everything unraveled, I started to see that all of her confidence, all of her bravado, was built on a foundation that wasn't nearly as solid as it appeared. And when that foundation cracked, it crumbled faster than even I could have imagined. The first cracks appeared during the court battle. Maria walked into that courtroom with the same defiant air she always carried, like she was untouchable. But as the hearings went on and her lies started to unravel, the cracks widened. The judge's ruling hit her hard, but I don't think it truly sank in until the day she packed her things and left the house for good. At first, she tried to maintain her facade. She moved in with Alex, of course she did, and for a while she seemed determined to prove to the world, and maybe herself, that she had made the right choice. I heard through mutual friends that they were seen at fancy restaurants, Maria laughing loudly at his jokes, trying to project an image of a perfect new life. But appearances can only hold up for so long. The first real sign of her downfall came a few weeks after she moved out. Alex, the man she had thrown everything away for, started pulling back. She must have thought she'd landed someone who would take care of her, someone who would keep her on a pedestal. But Alex wasn't that kind of man. He was a man who thrived on novelty, and when the excitement wore off, so did his interest. It started with the little things. He stopped answering her calls right away, started working late at the gym more often. And then, one day, I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Alex had started seeing someone else, a younger woman who worked out at his gym. Maria didn't take it well. One evening, as I was helping Nate with his science homework, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. I hadn't heard from her in days, and her sudden message caught me off guard. "We need to talk." I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "What's going on?" I replied, keeping it short. She called me instead of texting back. Her voice, once so confident, was shaky. "Michael, I wanted to see if we could figure out a better arrangement with the kids. This visitation schedule isn't working for me." I could hear the desperation in her tone, the thinly veiled attempt to gain sympathy. "Maria," I said, keeping my voice steady, "the schedule isn't about you. It's about what's best for Nate and Sophie." Her silence was telling. For the first time, she didn't argue. As weeks turned into months, her visits with the kids became increasingly sporadic. She would cancel at the last minute or forget entirely, leaving Nate and Sophie waiting by the window, their excitement slowly fading into disappointment. It infuriated me, but I kept my focus on being there for them. Then came the day when Nate, always the quieter of the two, said something that broke my heart. "Dad," he said, setting his fork down during dinner, "why doesn't Mom care about us anymore?" I froze, unsure how to respond. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from the painful truth. But Nate was too smart for lies. "I don't think it's that she doesn't care," I said carefully. "I think she's struggling to figure things out right now." "Sounds like she's just selfish," he muttered, his voice filled with a bitterness that no 11-year-old should ever have. As much as I wanted to defend her for their sake, I couldn't argue with him. Maria's world continued to shrink. She and Alex broke up, and without his financial support, she was forced to move into a small apartment across town. The lavish lifestyle she had tried so hard to maintain was gone, replaced by something far more humble. The last time I saw her was at Sophie's school recital. She showed up late, slipping into a seat at the back of the auditorium. When Sophie saw her afterward, her face lit up. For a moment. But when Maria gave her a quick hug and made an excuse to leave almost immediately, that light dimmed. Later that night, Sophie said quietly, "I don't think Mommy wants to be around us." That statement gutted me, but it also solidified something I'd suspected for a while. Maria wasn't capable of putting anyone else first. Not me, not Alex, and not even her own kids. Her downfall wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some fiery explosion or grand gesture of regret. It was slow, quiet, and utterly devastating. And the saddest part? She did it to herself. As I tucked Sophie into bed that night, I kissed her forehead and promised myself one thing. I would never let her feel unwanted again. Maria's choices had left scars, but I was determined to show my kids that love, the real kind, means showing up no matter what. And as I watched them heal, I realized that Maria's downfall wasn't just her loss. It was our freedom,